Galileo's greatest blunder. This is a short video about Galileo Galilei, the famous astronomer's greatest blunder, which probably destroyed his career and is not well known today. What follows is a segment from a presentation that I gave on automating data analysis to the Caltech Alumni Entrepreneurs Group in Palo Alto, California in June of 2017. And I discussed Galileo as an example of a very early data analysis. And I also discussed something that went wrong with that data analysis, a very dramatic error that tends to be swept under the rug, so to speak, in science textbooks and modern accounts of Galileo. It illustrates some of the problems that brilliant scientists have, that science as a system currently has, with egos and personalities and other human failings, cognitive biases that occur in data analysis performed by human beings. Let me explain a couple of things that I refer to in the segment. Kepler refers to Johannes Kepler, a contemporary of Galileo. Kepler figured out the mathematical laws for the motion of planets. The Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II is the king who funded Kepler's research. He is frequently not mentioned in science textbooks, and most people have never heard of him, but he was actually quite important. Without further chatter, I will start the segment. I will have a few comments after the segment explaining a few things and pointing out the relevance of the situation that occurred with Galileo to the modern day. Another task, which is also important, is to convince the people of the results that you produce. So say you've finally done all of this and you've got this analysis and you think you understand the motion of the planets and you've got it all worked out. How do you convince the Pope in this case, or the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, or other non-specialists that they can trust your results? And so this is another thing that humans do. They generate some kind of report or document, usually to try to convince the powers that be, or whoever their funding agency is, or venture capitalists, or whatever, what they should do. This is an absolutely horrible example of how to persuade other people of your point of view. This is Galileo's dialogue on two systems, in which he attempts to convince the Pope and others of the validity of the Copernican theory. So for those, I imagine this audience, many people know the story, but in those days, you would present your views usually by having a couple of people argue for each side, and a series of questions and answers. So Galileo in this book, he has two characters. He has Salviati, who's the cool, brilliant expositor of the Copernican system. That's okay. He has this other character named Simplicio, which means simpleton. It's a blatant put down, and he espouses the Ptolemaic theory, okay, the Aristotelian theory, the point of view of the Pope. And that's not all that Galileo did. So he sends this book to the Pope, you understand. He sends this book, which is a put down, to the Pope. In addition to doing that, he also is actually wrong in a lot of stuff that's in this book. And so he and Kepler and the other advocates of the Copernican theory were confronted with a physical question. So the critics of it, many of whom were actually very well-educated people, they said, okay, we understand the math works. We understand you can do these computations and you can explain the motion of Mars and these other planets in this mathematics. But your physical theory of what's going on requires that the Earth is spinning around at thousands of miles per hour. It's not just a little bit of motion, it's a lot of motion. And it's flying through space at thousands of miles per hour. Doesn't seem like there's motion, right? You know, where is it, right? How do you, so they confronted him and said, can you prove that the Earth is moving like this? And that's actually hard to do. There is a way to do it, but he didn't know how to do it. So he seized upon a primarily discredited idea that you could explain the tides, the motion of the tides in the Mediterranean, by sloshing motion of the water from the spinning around of the Earth. It's completely incorrect. He threw out thousands of years of experience and observation that the tides were following the motion of the moon. There's a very famous exchange in letters between Galileo and Kepler's going, I just don't think that's it. I think there's this influence from the moon that's somehow directing the tides or pulling the tides. So this is not really something that's gone away. So these analyses, particularly when there's a lot of money involved or political power or things like that are involved, And they're very complex. People's egos gets involved, people's personalities. And this is actually an example of how not to go about presenting these controversial results successfully to people. And as I'll talk about automation, one of the hopes with automation would be to kind of take these human emotions out and have the machines generate consistent reports that are very bland. They're not going to call somebody Simplicio, and which also, being less emotionally involved, may not come up with things like the theory of the tides. In other words, they'll just go where the data is telling you.
Galileo's greatest blunder. Galileo's put-downs in the dialogue and his grossly incorrect and widely ridiculed theory of the tides destroyed his career. Galileo was a brilliant man and a brilliant scientist. He's often portrayed heroically in science textbooks and other sources today. He's often presented as reason versus primitive superstition, the backward ideas of the Catholic Church. As this blunder shows, he was not a paragon of reason. Galileo was brilliant, but he also had serious flaws. He was extremely arrogant, and he routinely put down other people, as he did with the Pope. In many respects, he was his own worst enemy. He was also wrong on occasion, partly because of his ego, as in this case. There are many examples of this behavior in brilliant scientists in the history of science, both as individuals, like Galileo, and entire fields, entire groups of people get fixated on a particular idea and reject obviously contradictory data and logical arguments by other people. Now, fortunately, the motions of the planets were largely an esoteric issue of relevance only to a small group of specialists at the time. So Galileo's blunder didn't really matter, in fact. That's not what people believed at the time. So the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, for example, believed in astrology. The interest in these questions was driven by the belief that astrology worked and you could predict the future, or to some degree predict the future, through the motions of the planets and the stars. So people, powerful people, took it seriously at that time. But fortunately, it really wasn't relevant at all. Had Galileo been working in medical fields or other fields with serious applications to people, everyday life, a mistake like this, letting your ego get the better of you, could have cost the lives of millions of people or caused other severe problems. There are examples in the history of medicine, for example, notably the resistance to sanitary procedures, antiseptic measures, where this ego-driven behavior cost many, many, many lives. Knowledge of cognitive biases largely does not protect us from these errors. In fact, it often provides a way to rationalize away the opposition or disagreement of other people and contradictory data. You say, well, those people are cherry-picking the data, that data that obviously disagrees with what I believe, all that data that the tides are related to the position of the moon, we can throw that out. Just cherry-picking the data. At present, we still suffer, just as Galileo did, from this human weakness in the way that we do data analysis, which is very complicated and error-prone. And it's very, very easy for people's cognitive biases to feed into the data analysis and overpower their reasoning. We're probably observing this in many of the disputes in the current coronavirus COVID-19 crisis, which will hopefully be over. So I hope that people will be watching this video long after the crisis is over. So Galileo's greatest blunder is not just an interesting story from the past, but something that is with us today. These kind of blunders are undoubtedly occurring, even as I speak, all over the world. This video was produced on April 30th, 2020. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email or on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored advertising beholden, and big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and improving results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page. Scan the QR code in the lower right corner to get the Patreon link. Our Patreon link is also in the show notes below.